Nestled in the serene foothills of Mapleton, Colorado, a family lived what appeared to be an idyllic life. But beneath this picturesque facade, a dark secret brewed, a secret that would lead to betrayal, obsession, and a gruesome tragedy no one could foresee. What drives someone to cross the lines of morality so far that it ends in bloodshed? How can a seemingly perfect life crumble into chaos in the blink of an eye? These questions haunt the story of Jessica Harper, a 34-year-old mother whose double life turned deadly. If you're fascinated by unraveling the darkest mysteries and exploring gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become part of our investigative community. Let's dive into the case. Jessica was everything her neighbors aspired to be: charming, creative, and the glue of the community. She managed a successful freelance graphic design business while juggling her responsibilities as a mother to triplets, Liam, Noah, and Sophia. Her husband, David Harper, was a well-respected tech executive, often traveling the world to pitch groundbreaking innovations. To outsiders, the Harpers were the quintessential suburban dream. Jessica volunteered at her children's school, organized Mapleton's annual charity gala, and led a community art group. But perfection is often a mask, and she wore hers with increasing unease. Behind the warm smiles and artistic talent lay a woman feeling neglected and restless. David's frequent absences left her craving connection, a craving that led her to the unlikeliest of people. Serafina Vale, the 18-year-old daughter of their next-door neighbor, became Jessica's confidant. She initially mentored Serafina, offering guidance on career aspirations and navigating adulthood. But their relationship quickly devolved into an affair as Jessica became hopelessly fascinated with Serafina's boundless enthusiasm and innocence. This dangerous liaison became her escape, her way of reigniting the passion missing from her life. In the months leading up to the tragedy, her behavior shifted dramatically. She withdrew from her community activities, and those closest to her noticed her once bright demeanor dimming. Her obsession with Serafina grew, consuming her thoughts and actions. Jessica began isolating Serafina from her friends and family, stoking an invisible fire that would soon burn out of control. On a crisp September morning in 2018, David returned home after an overnight work trip. Expecting the usual clamor of children preparing for school and the aroma of breakfast from the kitchen, he was greeted by an eerie silence. As he called out for Jessica, unease crept in, the stillness of the home foretelling the grim discovery that would change everything. Her home was soon cordoned off with bright yellow crime scene tape, the once peaceful suburban street now a hub of flashing lights and murmuring neighbors. Detective Diana Kessler, known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth, arrived minutes after Officer Michael Trent, a rookie eager to prove himself, had begun securing the scene. The air was thick with tension as Kessler entered the chaotic bedroom, her eyes immediately drawn to the crimson-stained carpet where Jessica lay. "Start documenting everything," Kessler ordered Trent, who nervously fumbled with his notebook. She crouched near Jessica's body, her gloved hand hovering over the shattered remains of a lamp. Pieces of glass sparkled like cruel stars amidst the blood, a stark reminder of the violence that had erupted in this room. Jessica's face bore fresh bruises, a clear sign of a physical altercation. Her nails were cracked and stained, suggesting she had clawed at her attacker. Kessler made a mental note to scrape for DNA. The overturned nightstand revealed its own secrets: a partially crushed smartphone with a darkened screen and a prescription bottle without a cap. She paused, tilting her head. The label read, lorazepam, commonly used for anxiety. "Trent," she called, her tone firm but calm. "Log this and bag it. We'll need tox screens." He nodded, his pen scribbling furiously as he tried to keep up. The faint scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Kessler turned toward the closet, its doors ajar. Inside, clothing hung neatly, but a pair of high-heeled shoes lay on their sides, as if kicked in haste. She narrowed her eyes. Beneath the hanging garments, a faint smear of blood traced across the hardwood floor. "Search the closet thoroughly," Kessler instructed another officer. "The killer may have tried to hide something or even entered through here." Meanwhile, outside, David sat slumped against a police cruiser, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He stared blankly ahead, barely registering the neighbors who huddled together across the street, their hushed voices weaving theories from fragments of gossip. Kessler emerged from the house briefly to question David. His eyes darted to hers, hollow and wet. She was fine when I left. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice barely audible. We'll figure it out, Kessler replied, her expression unreadable. But in her mind, questions churned. Was David truly innocent, or was this the act of a husband hiding darker secrets? Inside the house, officers discovered a second shocking detail: Jessica's wedding band, stained with blood, resting precariously on the windowsill. It was as though it had been deliberately placed there, a chilling token left behind. Inside the Mapleton Police Department's sterile interrogation room, Serafina sat rigidly on a cold metal chair, her hands trembling as she picked at the hem of her hoodie. The faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead only added to the tension in the room. Detective Kessler entered, her expression calm but probing. She placed a slim folder on the table between them, its contents hidden but weighty. Serafina, Kessler began, her voice steady but pointed. We need to talk about your relationship with Jessica Harper. Serafina's gaze darted toward the one-way mirror, as if silently pleading for an escape. We were friends, she said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Kessler raised an eyebrow, flipping open the folder to reveal photos from the crime scene. Friends don't usually leave bruises like this, she countered, sliding a close-up image of Jessica's arm across the table. She recoiled slightly, her face pale. I didn't hurt her, Serafina blurted out, her voice cracking. She was different these last few weeks. She wouldn't leave me alone. Kessler leaned forward, her tone sharpening. Different how? Serafina took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in fragments. She described how Jessica's affection had turned suffocating. Jessica had started showing up at her house unannounced, leaving gifts and love letters in her mailbox. On one occasion, she had even broken into her bedroom late at night, claiming she couldn't stand being apart. I told her it was too much, Serafina admitted, tears welling in her eyes, but she just kept pushing. She said she'd ruin my life if I tried to end things. Kessler's pen hovered over her notepad, capturing every detail. What did she mean by ruin your life? Did she ever threaten you directly? Serafina hesitated, then nodded. She said she'd tell my parents, my friends. She said no one would see me the same way again. I was terrified. Kessler pressed Serafina on her whereabouts the night before the murder. Her answers were shaky, her timeline inconsistent. She claimed she had been home, but when asked if anyone could verify her story, she faltered. Meanwhile, back at the Harper residence, forensic specialists uncovered new evidence. A discarded phone charger found under the bed, its cable stained with blood. The forensics team speculated it could have been used as a weapon in the struggle. Detective Kessler was informed immediately, her mind racing with possibilities. Was Serafina truly the attacker, or was she another pawn in a far more intricate game? David's alibi initially seemed airtight. He presented time-stamped emails, call logs, and even surveillance footage showing him leaving his office in downtown Denver late at night. However, Detective Diana Kessler wasn't ready to rule him out. Something about his calm, almost rehearsed demeanor didn't sit well with her. Kessler's partner, Detective Jake Morgan, a seasoned investigator known for his direct approach, reviewed David's records. He's covered his tracks well, Morgan muttered, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Almost too well. Meanwhile, forensic analysts uncovered a potentially crucial clue: traces of blood on the steering wheel of David's black Audi, parked in the driveway the morning Jessica was found. The blood was a match for her, raising unsettling questions. Had David moved her body, or had he been involved in the struggle before leaving the house? Kessler decided to dig deeper into his professional life. An anonymous tip led her to a name: Daniel Vargas, a junior associate at David's firm who had recently been fired under suspicious circumstances. When contacted, Daniel reluctantly agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the outskirts of Mapleton. Under the hum of casual diners and clinking cups, Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. David Harper isn't the squeaky clean guy everyone thinks he is, he began, glancing nervously over his shoulder. He detailed instances of David's unethical practices at the firm, bribing officials, manipulating contracts, and threatening employees. And his temper? Daniel added. Let's just say I've seen him lose it more than once. Back at the precinct, Kessler confronted David with the evidence from his car. His composure faltered slightly as he demanded to speak to his lawyer. "You're wasting your time," he snapped. "I didn't kill my wife." But she wasn't convinced. As she left the interrogation room, Morgan approached with a new lead. "We pulled Jessica's phone records," he said. "There are over a dozen calls between her and someone named Eleanor Bryce the night before her death." "Who is Eleanor?" Kessler asked, flipping through her notepad. "Her therapist," Morgan replied. "But here's the kicker. Jessica canceled her last 2 sessions and sent a cryptic voicemail about being watched." The discovery sent chills down Kessler's spine. If Jessica feared for her safety, why hadn't she sought help? And more importantly, who had she been afraid of? David, Serafina, or someone else entirely? At 10 a.m. on September 12, 2018, Detective Kessler's phone buzzed as she was reviewing case notes in her precinct office. The caller identified himself as Evan Carter, a technician at Repair Hub, a small electronics repair shop on Parkside Avenue in Mapleton. Carter explained that he had been working on a damaged home security system when he discovered a disturbing piece of evidence. "The footage, there's something on it," Carter stammered, his voice tense. "I think it's related to the Harper case." Within minutes, Kessler and Morgan were en route to the shop. The small storefront buzzed with activity, customers oblivious to the gravity of what had been discovered. Carter ushered the detectives into a back room, his hands shaking slightly, as he pointed to a monitor displaying paused security footage. "This system came in 2 days ago," he explained. "The customer said it had been acting up for weeks. I didn't think much of it until I started recovering the files." Kessler's sharp eyes locked onto the screen as Carter hit play. The timestamp indicated the footage was from the night of Jessica Harper's murder. Grainy but unmistakable, the video showed a figure entering the Harper residence through the back door at approximately 2:37 a.m. Morgan leaned closer. "Can you enhance this? Make out any features?" "I'll try," Carter replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The image sharpened slightly, enough to reveal that the figure was wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. A faint reflection in the glass door suggested the person might have been carrying something, a small metallic object, possibly a gun. "Do you know who brought this system in?" Kessler asked, her voice taut. "It was a woman," Carter said, hesitating. "Mid-40s, maybe. Dark hair. She didn't leave a name, just dropped it off and paid in cash." Morgan's pen hovered over his notebook. "Could be Helena Vale," he muttered under his breath, referencing the proximity of her home to the crime scene. Kessler nodded, but kept her thoughts guarded. It was too early to jump to conclusions. Neighbors had previously reported a heated argument between Helena, Serafina's mother, and Jessica just weeks before the murder. The altercation had taken place in the front yard of Jessica's, with raised voices loud enough to draw attention. It was time to question Helena directly. Kessler and Morgan arrived at her modest home late in the afternoon. She opened the door cautiously, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the 2 detectives. "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding Jessica Harper," Kessler began, her tone neutral but firm. She sighed heavily, stepping aside to let them in. "I figured this was coming," she muttered, motioning them to sit at the small dining table. Helena admitted to the argument but denied any involvement in Jessica's death. "Yes, I confronted her," she said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I knew something was going on between her and Serafina. She was manipulating my daughter, controlling her. I told her to stay away." Kessler pressed further. "What exactly did you say during that argument?" She hesitated before responding. "I told her that if she didn't back off, I'd make sure everyone knew what she was doing to my daughter." Morgan leaned forward, his pen poised over his notebook. "Did you ever follow through on that threat?" "No," she snapped, glaring at him. "I didn't need to. Serafina was already pulling away from her. She was terrified of Jessica." Kessler studied Helena's face for a moment before asking, "Where were you the night Jessica was killed?" Her gaze hardened. I was at work, pulling a double shift. You can check with my boss at the diner. I clocked out just after midnight. With her alibi noted, the detectives weren't ready to dismiss her just yet. The argument she'd described, combined with her proximity to Jessica and Serafina, made her a person of interest. Back at the precinct, the footage was handed over to the digital forensics team for deeper analysis. They uncovered 5 video files, buried deep within the memory of the home security system, each dated between March and early September 2018. These recordings revealed unsettling glimpses into Jessica's private life, exposing her clandestine relationship with Serafina Vale. It became disturbingly clear that Jessica had been the one installing and managing the hidden cameras. Tiny devices, cleverly concealed in everyday items like picture frames and a bedside clock, had captured intimate and often volatile interactions between she and Serafina. In one recording, Jessica could be seen berating Serafina, her voice sharp and commanding. Serafina, visibly uncomfortable, repeatedly pleaded for her to stop filming. The most damning clip was recorded 2 days before her murder. It captured an argument that escalated to a chilling climax. Her voice, low and menacing, could be heard threatening to release their private recordings. "You leave me, and everyone will know who you really are," Jessica hissed. Serafina's panicked protests filled the room before she fled, slamming the door behind her. Detective Morgan studied the timestamps closely. "This changes everything," he muttered, watching Serafina's tear-streaked face frozen on the screen. She was scared. This wasn't just manipulation, it was blackmail. Armed with this new evidence, Kessler's team revisited the Harper residence. A meticulous search revealed the physical cameras Jessica had used, each wired to record directly to the security system. These devices solidified the narrative the footage had begun to unravel. Jessica had used her knowledge of Serafina's vulnerabilities as a weapon, creating a toxic dynamic of control and fear. On September 14, 2018, after days of grueling investigation, Serafina was brought in for formal questioning. Unlike her first interview, her demeanor this time was different. Resigned, almost relieved. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, she broke her silence. "She wouldn't let me go," she admitted, her voice trembling. "She said she'd ruin me if I left. That night, when she came at me again, I didn't know what else to do." On the night of the murder, Serafina had gone to Jessica's house intending to end their relationship for good. But Jessica had anticipated this. The argument quickly turned violent, with she grabbing Serafina's arm and attempting to shove her toward the bed. In the chaos, Serafina reached for the gun Jessica kept hidden in her nightstand. The single shot ended the struggle, and Jessica's life. At 8 p.m. on September 19, 2018, a convoy of police vehicles descended on the Harper home. Serafina was sitting quietly on the worn beige sofa, her hands clasped tightly together as her mother flipped through a stack of bills at the kitchen table. When Detective Kessler knocked at the door, Helena opened it with a wary expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice tight. Kessler stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "We have a warrant for Serafina Vale's arrest," she stated calmly. Serafina didn't flinch when the words were spoken. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The officers moved toward her, cuffs in hand. Helena erupted. "What do you mean? Arrest? For what?" Her voice rose as she followed the officers, who were gently guiding Serafina to her feet. Serafina turned to her mother, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she murmured. The officers led Serafina to the waiting patrol car as neighbors gathered, their faces lit by the flashing red and blue lights. The spectacle rocked the small Mapleton community. Whispers of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd as she was driven away, her face pale but composed. The arrest ignited a media frenzy. Reporters camped outside the Harper residence, and Serafina's friends from school were bombarded with questions about her relationship with Jessica. Speculations about her guilt or innocence dominated local news channels. The trial began on November 20, 2019, in a packed courtroom at the Mapleton County Courthouse. Serafina, dressed in a simple navy sweater and slacks, sat beside her attorney, Caroline Everett, a defense lawyer known for her unflinching approach to complex cases. Across the aisle was District Attorney Miles Kim, a stern figure with years of courtroom experience. Kim opened the trial by portraying Serafina as a cold, calculating murderer who killed Jessica to protect her secret. He highlighted her inconsistent statements during police interviews and pointed to her knowledge of where the gun was kept. Everett countered by focusing on the videos discovered in Jessica's home. She described the escalating emotional manipulation Serafina had endured, painting Jessica as a controlling predator. "My client was not a cold-blooded killer," Everett told the jury. "She was a young woman trapped in a web of fear, coerced and cornered until she saw no way out." The courtroom grew tense as the videos were played, revealing Jessica's threats and volatile behavior. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Serafina's sobbing voice begged Jessica to stop filming. Several jurors looked visibly shaken. In the midst of it all, David sat stoically, his hands clenched tightly on the wooden bench. The revelations about Jessica's double life had left him hollow, struggling to reconcile the woman he had loved with the stranger revealed in court. The Harper triplets were absent, sheltered from the public spectacle that had consumed their family. On November 29, 2018, the courtroom was hushed as the verdict was read. Serafina Vale was found guilty of manslaughter, a decision the jury reached after 8 hours of deliberation. Influenced by evidence of Jessica's coercion and the psychological toll on Serafina, they rejected the prosecution's push for a murder conviction. The presiding judge, Marla Hawthorne, handed down a sentence of 10 years in a medium-security facility, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. As the sentence was announced, the room erupted with a mix of emotions. Jessica's family, seated in the front row, exchanged glances of anger and disbelief. David clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the bench in front of him. Behind him, murmurs rippled through the gallery where some spectators nodded in reluctant understanding of the verdict. Others whispered that Serafina's sentence was far too lenient. Helena Vale wept quietly as her daughter was escorted out of the courtroom. Serafina herself remained stoic, her face pale but calm, as if the weight of the last few months had finally lifted. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed to capture reactions, their cameras flashing as the Harper family exited silently, refusing to speak to the press. Serafina began her sentence at the Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility, a 2-hour drive from Mapleton. At just 18, she entered a world vastly different from the suburban life she had known. Her days were spent in counseling sessions and educational programs aimed at helping inmates build new lives. A prison therapist, Dr. Emily Graves, noted Serafina's willingness to engage in therapy, describing her as a young woman desperate to understand the choices that led her here. Meanwhile, David struggled to navigate life without Jessica. The once confident corporate executive took a step back from his demanding career, dedicating himself to raising his triplets, Liam, Noah, and Sophia. Shielding them from the details of their mother's death proved impossible in a town still buzzing with whispers. The children, now 10 years old, showed signs of emotional turmoil, their once carefree laughter replaced by cautious, somber tones. Helena, racked with guilt, visited Serafina weekly. During one visit, she tearfully told her daughter, "I should have seen it, Serafina. I should have known something was wrong." Serafina could only nod, the unspoken pain between them filling the silence. In Mapleton, Jessica's death remained a grim touchstone for the community. Her carefully constructed public image as a doting wife and mother stood in stark contrast to the secrets that unraveled after her death. Friends and neighbors, once in awe of the Harper family, began reevaluating their perceptions, questioning how well they truly knew one another. For others, it was simply a haunting reminder that behind closed doors, even the brightest lives could conceal the darkest truths.